Before we move on, we need to spend a small amount of time becoming familiar with modular programming. And the reason that we need to do that is because that's the way the calculator solution has been programmed. So in order for you to fully understand what's happening and be able to use the code to then go on and make your own applications, you need to have a good understanding of modular programming. What is modular programming then? Think of it as a way of splitting up your code into discrete blocks which carry out a specific purpose. And the reason that you have to adopt this way of programming is because your programs are about to become more complicated. They will contain more code, and you'll probably find that you repeatedly carry out the same few lines of code to carry out a specific task. So let's write down a definition of modular programming. So modular programming is a way of organising program code into definable blocks. The blocks, and sometimes they're called chunks, carry out a specific task. So that's it. That's what modular programming is. It's just a way of writing your code, and the code's written in blocks. It's written in sub-programs. So the blocks are called sub-programs. At the moment, you've been working with one program file, and all inputs have came into your one program. Now what you're going to learn about is how to create sub-programs within your program, and then these sub-programs have got their own inputs, and if it's a function, its own outputs. And you're going to learn how to handle that, how to call these sub-programs into operation, and then how to handle anything that's passed out from a function back into the calling program. So there is specific terminology associated with modular programming, and that is really the main focus of higher programming. So over here in the learning areas, you can see sub-programs can be subdivided into two types: procedure and a function. The parameters are what are passed into your sub-program, and they can be split up into formal and actual. When you actually call a procedure or function into action, you might want to pass inputs into it, and that's called parameter passing. And there's two ways you can do that: by reference and by value. We'll have a look at that. And part of the processing of your sub-program might be the creation of variables. And if the variable is created within your sub-program, it's called local. But if it's been created in the main program, it's called global. And that will affect the scope of that variable. Let's have a look at this in practice then. So open Thorny. Now I've created a file here called modular programming. And what we'll do is we'll continue on from what we were learning about in the previous video about manipulating strings, and we will create two sub-programs to handle removing trailing space characters and space characters from between strings. Okay, so let's put in a comment to say what we're going to do. So modular program will remove trailing space characters and space characters from within a string. Okay, when you start to work with modular programs, create as normal your multi-line comment. If you've got any imports into your program, you would put those in next. and then you would define your subprograms, and there is a reason for doing that. It's because, remember, a Python program interprets, so it interprets each line one after the other. So it must have seen the definition for the subprogram before you can call it into action. Right, we're going to define two functions to strip off any preceding and trailing white space, and then to strip out any space characters. Okay, so def is the keyword, the Python keyword for defining a subprogram, and we'll call the first one remove trailing spaces, and we want a local variable in here, and we'll call it updated str, and we'll assign it nothing to begin with. I'll put a comment in here to say local variable. Now that means when this program executes, that variable space will be created in RAM, and as long as this subprogram is executing, that variable will exist. But as soon as the subprogram terminates, this variable updated str will be garbage collected. It will be removed from RAM, and that's a good thing because it means the system resources of the space that you've got in RAM are not being hogged by variables that you're never going to use after you've used them once, that you're never going to use after the subprogram terminates. Right, now what we want to do here is we want to put into updated str the result of the calculation to remove the trailing spaces. Can you remember the string manipulation method for doing that? Dot strip. But we haven't passed into this function what it is that we want to strip off. So this is where you were defining here the parameter. And so we could call this any name we wanted. So let's call it string with spaces. Let's just call it that. Great big long name there. So string, now we can refer to this. Dot strip. So this local variable updated str now contains the original string with the preceding and trailing white spaces stripped off it. Because it's a function, we need to return updated str back to the calling program. Now we haven't added anything to our main program yet apart from this definition of our function. So what we want to do is we'll have two variables in our main program, one to contain the original string and one to contain the updated string. So we'll say original string, and we'll set that up to be an empty string. So we've just declared it, and updated string, we'll set that up at the moment to be an empty string. Now we will ask the user to input a string, so we'll say original string is assigned input, the result of this input, and we're going to ask the user to enter a string. Don't worry about spaces. Now what we're going to do, we're going to call remove trailing spaces to remove unwanted space characters. Okay, so and we're going to assign the result of this to updated string. So we'll say updated string is assigned, and now we're going to call our function remove trailing spaces, remove trailing spaces, and we're passing in the argument, the actual value that contains the string, original string. So we're passing in original string. So this is now calling remove trailing spaces into action. This code will be executed, and the last action is to return the value that's stored in this updated str. So that has been returned, and it will be stored in updated string. So let's print something out here to see what's happened. So we'll say your original string was, and then we'll add on to it original string. We'll put another print statement under here, and we'll say after update your string contains, and we'll add on to it the value in updated string. Right, let's save this and run it. So it says enter a string, don't worry about spaces. So I'm going to put in space, 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 hello, how are you, space, space, space. So your original string was, and here's all the spaces, hello, how are you. After update, your string contains hello, how are you. And you can see that the space has been removed. Now it might not be obvious to you that any changes taken place because it was leading and trailing spaces that have been removed. So what we could do is add in the len and then return that as well. So let's go back up to this remove trailing spaces, and we could define another function. So let's say def count, so let's call it character count. And the purpose of this is to return the number of characters in the string, so the length of the string. So we'll say string, and then what we'll say is string length is our variable, our local variable, and we'll say string length is assigned len string, and return string length. Okay, so we've got original string from our main program, we've got updated string, and we need to add on another variable here called, we'll call it str length. And we'll set it up to be 0 to begin with. Right, so now what we want to say is we want to find out the string length of this original string after the user has put something in here. So we will, in here, so it's the correct sequence of events, we'll say count the number of characters in the user's input string. So we say str length is assigned, and now we'll call our function, and our function is called character count. Sometimes it's a good idea to copy that so that you get the correct spelling. So character count, and then what we're going to pass into this function is the original string. So let's copy that and just paste that in there. And so it's going to count the number of characters and return that number, and it will be stored in string length. So what we want to say here, your original string was, and then we want to add on to that space it has, and then we want a space there, and then add on str length, and then concatenate onto that characters. That's fine, so I'm just going to make this a bit bigger so that you can see it. So I'm going to copy that, copy, and paste this in. Now, after update, I need to find out how many characters are in updated string. So I'm going to have to call this function again, character count. So this is you seeing one of the advantages of modular programming. It's the reusability. You can reuse the same code again and again. So here where it says str length, character original string, I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to paste it under that print statement. And the reason that I'm going to do it under the print statement is because I want str length to be used in this print statement. And then I want it to be updated with the character count, but not of original string, of updated string. So let's change that to updated string. Okay, let's see if that works. So enter a string, don't worry about spaces. So space, space, space. I love bananas. Space, 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 space. Enter. Your original string was space, 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 I space, love space, bananas, space, space, space. It has 21 characters. So let's see if that's right. So that was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So that was correct. After update, your string contains I love bananas and it has 14 characters because you've got rid of the 3 preceding spaces and the 4 after. Right, now we need to create a subprogram which will remove white spaces within the string rather than preceding and trailing white spaces. Now there is a string manipulation method which can do this, and it's called replace, and you need to pass in 2 parameters. So let's make a subprogram to handle this. So we'll use our keyword def and we'll call it remove spaces within string. And in this formal definition, we have to identify a formal parameter, and we'll call the formal parameter, we'll just call it string again. And when we call this function into action, we will pass in the actual parameter, the argument. But when you're defining it, you need to define it using the formal parameter. So string is formally what we're going to call it. Let's just create a local variable called updated str, and we'll create it as an empty string to begin with, and then we will assign to updated string the result of manipulating the string that has just been passed in. So we'll say string dot replace, and inside here we need 2 parameters to pass into this dot replace method. And the first is we're going to replace all instances of the space character with no space. So this is quite interesting because we're defining a subprogram here to handle removing space characters from within a string, and as part of that we're calling a predefined function, if you like, called replace. So in this example program we're creating subprograms which you could argue you don't actually need, because each of the subprograms is calling a predefined function like len, and we've got this one down here, dot strip. But anyway, this is just for example, this is to explain it to you with something that you're familiar with. So it's a function, so we need the return keyword because a function always returns. That's what makes it different from a procedure. A procedure doesn't return a value, a function does return a value. And what we're going to return is updated str. Right, now we need to call this into action. So we'll go down to the main program, and underneath our print statements, that's okay. Let's put in a comment here to say what's happening here is we're going to remove a white space from within the string, and we'll say updated string is assigned remove, now what did I call it? Remove spaces within string. Let's just copy that, make it easy for ourselves. Saves errors. It's actually best practice is to copy and paste it. Now what we're passing into this, our updated string is removing trailing spaces, and then we print it out, but now we're going to, from our updated string, we're going to remove the white spaces from between it. So we want to pass in here, let's copy updated string and use that as our argument, our actual parameter that we're passing into this function, because this is us calling it, the main program, line 37 here, is calling it, and the returned value will be assigned to updated string. And then we want to print out, and we'll concatenate to it updated string. So what do we want to actually say here? After white space has been removed, your string contains. Okay, let's save that and run it. So we say space, 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 hello, how are you today? Space, 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 and we've got your original string was hello, how are you today, with your preceding and trailing white space, and it had 32 characters. After you removed the preceding and trailing white space, it now said hello, how are you, question mark, question mark, question mark, and the character count was reduced to 26 characters. And then finally, after you've removed the white space from actually within, you've got rid of the space character between the word hello and how, and you can see that they've all been removed. Good. Let's recap on what we know about modular programming now. So here's the program. Let's make it a bit bigger and see what we can do with this. Let's annotate it. So at the moment we have created 3 functions, and the reason that we know they're functions is because of this return keyword. The return keyword means that it's the subprogram is a function. If we look over here at our label for subprograms, you can see that there's 2 types, procedure and function. And function always returns a value. And these definitions, because of this keyword return, tells you that these 3 subprograms, remove spaces within string, character count, and remove trailing spaces, are functions. So these are functions. Now, underneath here we can say, we see this term parameters, and there is the term formal and actual. Now in formal it says parameter, in actual it says argument, so A actual, A argument. Now the formal parameter, let me change this to blue, the formal parameter is here when you are defining your subprogram. you define the formal parameter. So this is a formal parameter. And we've got a formal parameter here, string, and we've got a formal parameter here, string with spaces. Now, this formal parameter string is referred to within the subprogram here. You can see it being used. So the formal parameter is used within the definition of the subprogram. So this word string here, this variable, this parameter that's been passed in, is used here to find the length of it, and then it's assigned here. Again, in this remove spaces within string, the formal parameter string, you can see it being referred to here, string.replace, and remove trailing spaces, string with spaces, you can see here in line 19, string with spaces dot strip. So the formal parameter, in Python you don't need to define formally the data type of the parameter, but in other languages you would have to do that to say that the parameter is an integer or the parameter is a string. In this case it's a string, and we've used a meaningful parameter name. We've called it string, so that's telling whoever's reading this program, oh, that parameter must be of data type string. Now the actual parameter, you can see the actual parameter in action when the sub-procedures are being called by the main program. So if this is the main program here, so this is the main program, and these are the calls. Here's on line 28, we've got a call. And then again on line 30, we've got a call. And on line 32, we've got a call. So we've called our 3 sub-programs into action. So on line 28, it says remove trailing spaces, and what's passed in as the parameter is the actual parameter. So this is the actual parameter, and its original string, which is here, it's a variable which was defined on line 22. It was assigned the input from the user on line 26, and that value is being passed into our remove trailing spaces subprogram on line 28. So the actual parameters are the values that are passed into the call to the subprogram. You can see here again on line 30, the actual parameter that's been passed in is updated string, and you can see updated string is defined on line 23 as an empty string. It's assigned the result of the returned value from remove trailing spaces on line 28, and then that value is being passed into character count. On line 32, the subprogram is called into action, remove spaces within string, and what's been passed into it is updated string. So these are actual parameters, arguments, actual parameters. Okay, so parameter passing next. Are you passing by reference or are you passing by value? Now, in all of these examples, we have passed by value. We've taken a copy of the value of the variable and passed it into the subprogram. This example does not discuss pass by reference. we will discuss that in the context of arrays later in the course. Now, variable scope, we have got some global variables. This is the main program, which means these could be defined as global variables. Whereas the variables that have been declared here, this is a local variable. So updated str is a local variable, string length is a local variable, and updated str is a local variable. And the reason that they're local is because they've been defined inside a subprogram, which means they only exist when this subprogram is actually being executed. So what that means, for instance, on line 28, when we call remove trailing spaces, the program will then execute the code in remove trailing spaces. So this line will be executed, and that will be your local variable created. Memory location in RAM will be associated to updated str, and the value initially will be an empty string. Then this line 19 will be executed, and then line 20 will be executed. At that point, remove trailing spaces stops executing, and the variable updated str will no longer exist. It will be garbage collected from RAM, and the program will return to line 28, and that value which has just been returned will be stored in updated string. Now, the last one here, calling subprograms. You can see the calls on line 28, line 30 and line 32. Now, this is our first discussion on modular programming, and in the next video we will discuss modular programming in the context of the solution to the calculator. Good.